Well, hi, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange. We've got a lot to talk about again today. When is someone going to finally admit that the sewer system in Milwaukee simply does not work as it should for a community this size? We'll talk about the talk this past week that we're getting this high-speed train between Milwaukee and Madison, whether we want it or not. And we'll talk about the efforts to stop the Arizona law that people there had hoped would deal with the problem of illegal immigration. Joining us tonight are longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally, Gerard Randall, a consultant and local job creation expert, and Denise Callaway, the communications director for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we'll talk about is what I think is the absolutely tragic and continual dumping of sewage into Lake Michigan. Here we are on the shores of the largest freshwater supply in the world, and we just won't take care of it. We want to be called the Third Coast or the Fresh Coast. We're building a new UWM School of Freshwater Sciences. 2 weeks ago, we dumped more than 500 million gallons of sewage into the lake. Last week, we allowed more than 2 billion gallons to flow into the lake. How many thousands of people for the umpteenth time had their basements flooded? Isn't it time, finally, when we admit that the sewer system here needs to be rebuilt at whatever cost for the good of the community and the safety of the people who live in Milwaukee? This is crazy.
Well, and we haven't seen the end of it. MMSD predicts that August, which is typically the month of heaviest rainfall in the course of the year, may bring more of the same news. Flooding in basements, foundations being washed away. And the reality of all of this is that the cost to build an infrastructure or repair an infrastructure to accommodate all this water is going to be horrific. I don't know that the public is prepared to bear that cost, the cost to make the repairs. On an aging system, we've got some lines that date back as far as the 1880s, some certainly that are even older. I know in my neighborhood, I've got lines that go back that run from my house to 1890. So we're looking at the taxpayers being asked to bear a cost for making these repairs that I know those who sit on the MMSD commission aren't fully prepared to advocate for. They want to take a slower approach, one that is certainly a lot more measured in recognizing the need that this community has to be cautious with its cost. This problem is not going to go away just because the cost is too great to make the fix.
And Denise, I don't think we can continue to hear the explanation from MMSD that it is much better than it used to be. Well, maybe it is better than it used to be, but we cannot expect the residents of this city constantly to have this much water in their basements.
Well, I think a couple of things. I do think those deep tunnels that were created have relieved a lot of the pressure. But the problem is we do have these aging infrastructures, the laterals that go from people's homes into the sewer line. Sewer lines and communities are aging. And I think, that's the real key thing here. And I agree with you. We can't continue to have this issue that happens every time we have a heavy rain and people's basements flood. I was lucky enough that I didn't have to deal with that problem, but I know enough people who did to know that it's a real issue that's impacting people's lives, much beyond the cleanup. It's the, people have talked about having to spend $10,000 to replace their furnace and all of the other appliances they have in their basements. It's a cost people can't continue to incur. So why we do say, boy, as a community, we're going to have to pay a lot to take care of this. There are some people who are already paying a lot and they're not getting the problem fixed. I think this is also so symptomatic of the fact that we do have these aging infrastructures in our communities, and whether it's the sewer lines and laterals that have to be replaced, or bridges, we're going to have to spend the money to do this because there really is not an option. It's not an option for people to continue to have sewage or water that backs up in their basements. And another thing, that's what we see when there's heavy rain. But there actually is a researcher in the metro area who has done a study that has shown that because laterals are in such poor repair, there is sewage that's leaking into the rainwater and the rainwater that goes into our systems every time it rains. This is a really serious problem, and as a community, we may not want to spend the money, but I don't know that we have an option not to do it.
You know, Joel, you were mentioning that you had water in your basement. If that happened again next week and the following week, aren't you going to get to the point where you say, okay, let's fix it now?
But truthfully, there is no system this community ever could build that would prevent what happened last week. You could spend hundreds of billions of dollars, and if you've got kids outside Otto's liquor store in Shorewood with water up to their heads, you're not going to be able to build any kind of system to take care of that. You know, I don't understand for sure what all this attack on MMSD is. The truth of the matter is what they're saying is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. If we hadn't built that deep tunnel, that's 500 million gallons of water that they kept out of the lake during that horrendous storm. Now, at the time of that project, and we remember all of the sewer wars and the suburbs not wanting to pay anything that's going to go to something called the Milwaukee Sewerage Commission, even though that happens to be the end of the line where it goes into the lake of all of what's coming from them. You know, that was the biggest public works project in the history of this community. Now, if we're ready to take on another biggest public works project in the history of this community to prevent, you know, some more of this stuff going in, okay. But I haven't heard any political leader suggest that. I haven't heard the mayor suggest that, the county executive, the governor, anybody else. Part of it's this tax cut culture in politics where you're not supposed to spend money on anything, no matter how necessary it is or how needed. But there's also, I have to say this, some alarmism over some of this stuff going into the lake. The truth of the matter is, some of the so-called untreated sewage that goes into the lake is not untreated. It's blended. It gets all but the final process, and you know. This, I think, Sewerage Commission has been very responsible. They point out the problem every time. They pointed out this problem with the sewer connections, and they say that's got to be the next place we attack, right, because that is creating tremendous problems. But it's going to take, you know, a political leader to step forward and say, okay, let's spend billions of dollars, and I don't hear them.
Well, I don't think anybody's going to do that in an election year. That's not going to happen. But, you know, for many people, and, you know, I can think of a number of people who I know that what happened last week with the water coming up in their basements, for them was the absolute tipping point, because they had water come up the week before that. Mm-hmm. And then last year, when we had a lot of rain in a short period of time, they had water come up then. So, I mean, it's a repeated problem. And, you know, though it's not the politically popular thing to do, I do think that we do expect our political leaders to take difficult stance when there's a critical community issue that's in place.
And I don't see a single one of them.
I agree with you.
And you've got rolling elections. So while you've got federal elections, statewide elections this year, a year and a half later, you've got the local elections, and no one is going to want to slit their throat on a campaign.
The only reason the deep tunnel got built was under court order. It was because a court stepped in, and court, you know, you can say all you want about how these courts are, you know, making, you know, rulings of their own.
Activist judges.
Yeah, these activist judges. Sometimes that's exactly what it takes to get anything done, because the politicians won't do it.
All right, next topic. Did you catch the comments by the U.S. Secretary of Transportation this week that we're going to get a high-speed train between Milwaukee and Madison, whether we want it or not? That there would be no stopping it at all. Interesting comments, seeing as how 2 of the 3 candidates for governor have pledged to bring that thing to a grinding halt. Maybe they should spend the $800 million set aside for the high-speed train on building a new sewer system in Milwaukee that works.
That isn't the way it works. You don't get to take nearly $1 billion that the federal government is going to give to your state and say, well, thanks for your $1 billion, but we'd like to spend it on something else other than what you want. This high-speed, this is such an absurd argument. The high-speed rail system, the rail of the future that's being built, is an interstate system. You don't get a state opting out of an interstate system. What if Wisconsin had opted out of the interstate highway system, and all the interstates, when they come to the border of Wisconsin, would turn into dirt roads? That doesn't make any sense at all. This is an interstate system. That's what the money is for. And we are so fortunate to be in the middle of this, of a system that connects Chicago and St. Louis and Milwaukee and Minneapolis. We're right in the center. As a result of that, we've got all the development that can come with that along that system. And we have right here in the middle of Milwaukee the great news that some of the rail cars for this high-speed system, which is an interstate system, are going to be built right here in Milwaukee, and that will be a growing business right here in the center of Milwaukee. The Republicans who are arguing, well, yeah, they're giving us $1 billion, but we're going to have to pay some operating costs. Operating costs that are less than 1% of the transportation expenditures in this state for highways. This is a gift. It's a wonderful gift, and we're right on the cutting edge of the future.
I love riding trains, Denise. I love riding trains. I think a train between Milwaukee and Madison would be fantastic. But I completely understand the people that say, well, yeah, it's like somebody giving you a new kitchen, but you can't afford to pay it off, and you can't buy the new stove and the new refrigerator, so you don't really need the new kitchen. If Wisconsin doesn't need the train line and Wisconsin doesn't want the train line, shouldn't Wisconsin have the option of saying, no, we don't want it?
But there are some people who do want the train line.
We don't care about them.
Thanks. No, there are people who do want the train line, and it's not just a matter of convenience, about being able to connect to these great places. It's a matter of business being able to be done more efficiently. And when business is done in a more efficient manner, it frees up capital for business expansion and for other things to happen that positively impact the economy. Joel made a really great point, and that is that this is part of an interstate system. I don't think that we want to be left out of the growth that's going to be taking place here. And it's not a matter of whether or not we feel like this is something that is absolutely urgent that we have it. It is, as I've talked about before on this issue, it's a matter of being somewhat forward thinking on this, that we have to look at the possibilities that this can present for us rather than just, what it might mean right now. And I think down the road, no pun intended, it really will provide us with some great opportunities in this community. And kind of selfishly, we want everybody to be able to say that they want this high-speed rail because the cars are going to be made here, and that's going to translate into more jobs in Milwaukee.
I don't doubt for a minute that if Walker was elected, he would say, stop building that right now.
I have no doubt that he would do that, or Neumann, likewise. You stole my thunder earlier, though.
To vote against Republicans.
Well, no, I don't think so. I love trains, too. I love train travel. I take the train frequently between Milwaukee and Chicago, in fact, more often than not. And I travel a lot between Milwaukee and Madison. I think having that spur to run between Milwaukee and Madison would be a great thing. But I think the arguments for both Scott Walker and Mark Neumann were kind of taken out of context in this sense. You've got massive federal overspending. This is a federal project. It is an interstate project. And you've got the federal government's budget priorities, I think, and many Republicans think, is just out of whack. Amtrak runs deficits. They run deficits annually. And so to say that the operating budget for this is not going to be stressed is a misstatement. It will be stressed. Expansion causes even greater stress, especially expansion where they haven't demonstrated how they're going to pay for those operating costs. Ultimately, it does come back either on the consumer or the taxpayer. In order to make those train rides more palatable to people, more attractive to people, they have to keep those costs low. Fortunately, there is enough ridership between Milwaukee and Chicago to justify some kind of expansion, but it hasn't been proven that that leg between Milwaukee and Madison is going to be the more attractive piece that will compel folk to shell out $25 or so for a one-way ticket to get there, and whatever the expense they're going to have to pay once they get there for transportation between their ultimate destination and the train station. So for me, it's a matter of priority. Do we really need it, or would it just be a nice thing to have? I think it would be a nice thing to have.
What about
but I don't think
of industry? What about jobs? There's not well, you know, every now and then friends disagree. There's not enough business stimulation to offset the cost of this. And that's my problem. That hasn't been demonstrated by anyone, that there's enough business stimulation to offset the cost of putting this leg in place.
Where would the business grow? In Watertown?
All along the route.
You know, stranger things could happen.
Yeah.
Of course it could happen in Watertown. You know, I think if we say, looking at that stretch between Milwaukee and Madison right now, and saying right now, is there enough business there to support it? Are we going to be able to create enough business opportunities? No, because we don't have that high-speed rail system there that can open new opportunities for us.
This also takes all kinds of pressure off of the freeways. You know, it saves maintenance, it saves expansion, it saves wiping out more businesses in Milwaukee.
Lives along the line as well.
Absolutely.
I agree with many of your arguments.
I agree with you. I think we both love trains. We both think it would be a great thing, but it's something we want or something we need.
We need to create jobs right now.
Absolutely.
And
We really do. This is part of the recovery.
This would not
This
be
is part of the future.
This would not be then the best expenditure of $800 million plus in order to create jobs. I'd rather create 800 millionaires just by giving them $1 million a piece.
That's the Republican way, giving money to
really wouldn't do that. You would not.
No, this is making millionaires as opposed to giving it to millionaires. To me, it's just an expenditure of money that at this time we cannot bear. And no one has demonstrated at this point that the spending of the $800 million is somehow or the other going to create jobs that will offset that cost or make that cost
it
worth
is the
the
future.
investment.
And here's the other thing. We all know, and one thing I think we'll all agree on is that small businesses really are what create jobs in this community. Small businesses do that
the ones
in this
Republicans
country.
just voted against giving money to?
Well, it's a little different story. But the thing that will happen is when we take a look at businesses that are going to be created along this spur, it's going to be small businesses. It's the opportunity for us to spur economic development with the very people who we know are going to create jobs, and some of these small communities that, quite frankly, in many ways hurt more during an economic recession that we're experiencing now than large communities do. So it's a way to not only look towards the future, but it's a way to grow jobs in communities where jobs are desperately needed.
All right, next topic. Let's talk for a few minutes about the state of Arizona not being allowed to put into effect the new anti-illegal immigration law that nearly everyone in that state supports. I wonder if the Obama administration is simply going to tie this up in court for years and years to come to prevent it from ever taking effect, because you can't really fight the federal government. If they want to stretch something out, they'll stretch it out.
They can stretch it out, and ultimately those players change. This really comes down to an argument amongst those who believe there ought not be any enforcement of immigration laws, that there ought not be any immigration policy. They would just as soon have open borders. And those who believe that if you're going to have immigration and some type of border system, that you've got to enforce that. The Obama administration has made it, I think, very clear that the expenditure of money to protect the borders, particularly in states like Arizona, is not a very high priority for them. Otherwise, it would be a done deal. Those folk took it upon themselves to enact a law which, after the appeals process, I think is going to be upheld. I think it will get to the U.S. Supreme Court, and that court will ultimately decide in favor of Arizona, because there were too many pieces to that don't make sense when you look at the consistency of it against federal law. For example, you've got right now states that have to enforce federal laws in other arenas. And for the federal government to say now, in this instance, we want to be the exclusive enforcers of that law and then not do it makes no sense. So I think the courts are going to allow Arizona to prevail in this piece. And unfortunately, for those who don't like current immigration policy or want to see a different immigration policy that will accommodate some type of amnesty program, I don't think we're going to see that happen in the next 2 years.
I don't think this is going to hurt Democrats as much in the elections as some of the conservative commentators are saying, because that Spanish-speaking and Latino voting bloc is huge in this country. So I think by fighting this, you're embracing that community.
Actually, I've heard very conservative commentators, including David Brooks, say in the long run, this will make the Republican Party less than a national party, that it does not have a chance in the long run if it alienates Latinos by what this law is: racial profiling, it is hatred towards immigrants, it is ugly. And when you said at the outset that almost everyone in Arizona supports it, that's not true. A third of Arizona is Latino, and believe me, they do not support it, and not every white in Arizona also is in favor of racial profiling. Law enforcement in Arizona is overwhelmingly against this law, except for
not Sheriff Joe.
Not Sheriff Joe, who's built his career on racism and brutality. But the police chiefs and sheriffs in everywhere but Maricopa County think this is not a responsibility they want put on them to enforce federal immigration policy. The judge who issued this decision was appointed by Bill Clinton, but at the recommendation of John Kyle, the conservative Arizona senator. This is a very sharp judge. Her decision, I thought, made some excellent points about no matter how you look at it, ordinary citizens and legal immigrants are going to get caught up in this.
They are, and I'm certainly not for open borders. I believe we should have an immigration law. I don't think you strengthen a federal immigration law, though, by allowing states to come in and decide what immigration laws they're going to have for their states. What you have then is a patchwork of laws that are ultimately not able to be enforced. And I do think that when we talk about, and you listen to the process that's going to be used, that Arizona would use to be able to stop someone or to question someone's immigration status when you stop them for a traffic stop. So I really want to know, who are they going to ask that question of? Because in reality, unless you are doing racial profiling, you need to ask every person you stop, whether they appear to be Latino or appear to be African American or appear to be Caucasian. You need to ask
how good their English is.
Right. You need to ask every single person what their immigration status is, because if you don't do that, you're racial profiling. You are. And then I think that becomes a mess of a law that's impossible for Arizona to enforce. So either admit you are going to be doing racial profiling because you're only going to stop black and brown people, or you're going to have to stop every single person. And that's something that's not going to be able to be done.
All right. Lots more fallout this week from the Shirley Sherrod controversy. And with all the accusations back and forth, some people are saying it's time for a frank discussion about race relations in this country. Rick Horowitz wouldn't mind having that discussion, but only if people are willing to leave 4 particular words out of it. Rick.
Say the magic words and end the conversation. Say the magic words and uncomfortable facts and figures disappear. Responsibility, complicity, vanquished with just a phrase. And what's the phrase? Playing the race card. As in, he's playing the race card, she's playing the race card, they're playing the race card, you're playing the race card. Though never, of course, I'm playing the race card. Never, we're playing the race card. Playing the race card is always something someone else does, by pointing out yet another example of inequality or injustice based simply on the color of someone's skin. But say the magic words and none of that matters. No need to defend or explain. You've stopped them right in their tracks. You and your all-purpose stain remover. You and your bumper sticker dressed up as thought. You've not only ended the conversation, you've won the conversation. Or so you tell yourself. Maybe you even believe it. Maybe you really can't see the difference in scope, in scale, in staying power. On this side, years of state-sanctioned, even state-mandated discrimination based on race. of violence or the constant threat of it based on race, of a restaurant, a hotel room, a ballot, or a bank loan denied to thousands, to millions of people year after year solely because of their race. And on the other side, how about two black guys standing outside one polling place 2 years ago with uniforms and a nightstick and an attitude, calling themselves the new Black Panther Party, because it beats calling themselves a handful of black guys desperate for attention and happy to scare the bejeepers out of white folks. Maybe you really can't see the difference, or maybe it's just easier to pretend you don't. After all, if we're all victims of racism, then no one's a victim, right? Are there professional victims? Hucksters and hustlers only too happy to turn racial injustice into sympathy, into a free pass for all sorts of crooked behavior? You bet. You see them in the headlines from time to time. You should see them in handcuffs. But what's that got to do with the rest of the conversation? Not much, unless, of course, you're trying to duck the rest of the conversation. Then it's really simple. Just say the magic words.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Of memories still to come. We found things to do